All right, hello everyone. Welcome to another discussion of Rings of Power Season 2. And we're going to be talking about episode number 3 today. And I am joined, as usual, by AP Canavan from A Critical Dragon, otherwise known as the Nemesis. Hello, AP. How are you today?
How many times do we have to go through this, Philip?
Forever.
You are the nemesis. You
Oh.
are the nemesis. I am the poor innocent one.
I don't know. I don't know. The way you said that with a smile on your face does not suggest innocence to me.
In case people don't know, what we've been doing is like we watch two episodes and then we sort of record these back to back, one discussing one on your channel and then one on mine.
Yeah.
And I would have to say, to warn people in advance, I am slightly less positive about episodes 3 and 4
Yeah.
than I was about episodes 1 and 2. I really liked episodes 1 and 2. Episodes 3 and 4, I have slightly more problems with. I was disappointed in a couple of the decisions, but on the whole, I am still enjoying the show. And
Right.
to be perfectly clear to people, as we keep saying, if you don't like it, that is fine because liking is based on preference. We are all entitled to like and dislike things. It is not liking is not the equivalent of good or bad. We we've talked about this before. I can like cheeseburgers.
Right.
You can dislike cheeseburgers. But me liking or you disliking does not make a cheeseburger good or bad intrinsically. It's about preference and entertainment. Different set of criteria. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. No, in general, I would say, to be honest, and I think I told you this in private, I did enjoy episodes 1 and 2. I liked the mythical direction they were leaning in those two episodes. And I feel that they tried to do a little too much for my taste in episodes 3 and especially 4. I like the idea of, kind of Middle Earth cameos, and we got a lot of those in these two episodes, but I'm not sure scrunching them all in this tiny space really worked that well. I felt that there was a lot of very jumbled, chaotic storytelling going on in these two episodes, but we're going to focus on episode 3 for now, and then our thoughts on episode 4 will be for the video over at A Critical Dragon. But so this one starts out with the storyline with Isildur and his horse Beric. Actually, is where we start. Beric, who kind of saves the day a little bit there, and we get a, I don't know if it's Shelob or one of Shelob's relatives or something of that nature, but it's in the right vicinity for Shelob or a spawn of Shelob or something. What did you think of the Beric Isildur spider bit here that we start off with?
to start talking about the horses in Tolkien's writing and in a lot of fantasy writing, um, quite often are smarter than their writers.
Yeah,
And we had Bill the Pony, Fatty Lumpkin, and what was it, Shadowfax. But
Shadow.
even if we think of other fantasy stories like Atreyu from the Neverending Story
Mm-hmm.
and Artax, the powerful, smart, brilliant horse. The horses are such an intrinsic part of a lot of fantasy writing,
Right.
and they're sometimes used as the equivalent of lassie. Oh, stamp your hoof. Oh, is Timmy trapped down the well? It's so we have the smart horse, and it's a trope. It happens. Am I enamored with it? No, but it's something that crops up all the time. The
Yeah.
stuff with the spiders, though, I was really interested in because when we think about it, the Shelob is the offspring of Ungoliant um, in that part of Mordor. But remember, the spiders also migrated across to Mirkwood.
Mm.
And I think the scene with Isildur shows that whole sort of, well, where did the Mirkwood spiders come from? They had to start off somewhere and gradually work their way across. So I think that the writers were leaning very heavily into this is a scene reminiscent of the Mirkwood spiders, and it's not Shelob herself, but
Uh-huh.
that sort of this is where they all came from.
Right.
So this this begins one of my issues that you just sort of mentioned with this, that it's drawing very heavily from things that were already established in, say, The Lord of the Rings at a much later date. And
Right.
it's kind of not shoehorning them in, but sort of, look, here's the stuff.
Right.
And it's because the whole sequence we get is very similar, not only to Frodo and Shelob, but also in The Hobbit with all of the spiders. And so I liked it kind of, but was it necessary for this? And I'm like, no, this is more showcasing stuff from Tolkien
Yeah.
and putting it in. What I find really interesting about it, if we think of when Tolkien's writings were done, they were obviously well before films like Alien and Aliens. And yet the visuals that we get here with the popping of the eggs and that squelching
Mm,
and the little legs coming out was
yeah.
so reminiscent of the visuals we got in Alien. So we have this wonderful sort of Aurora Boreas of influence and visual influence and narrative influence where we see the things going round and round and how one type of narrative actually influences another type of narrative. So I thought the sound design and because that squelching noise was really quite disturbing,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
creepy spider legs coming out, that was very reminiscent of Alien, and
Mm,
yet we know it actually comes from Tolkien's original writings. So I thought that was a lot of fun. It's just okay. So it showed us the spiders, and
yeah.
it could be like the influence or the inference could be that over the next coming decades and centuries, that's how the spiders might eventually ended up in Mirkwood.
Mm.
Cool, but yeah,
Yeah, I found a lot of these elements that they were including could be cool, kind of Middle Earth fan moments, but not necessarily they weren't necessarily good for the plot or the drive here in this story. But the narrative does continue with the Isildur falling in with Estrid, who, when they first meet, is a very pointed introduction when she stabs him in the thigh. And then
it could
they
have been
fall
an
in.
adventure, but then he took an arrow to the knee would be the line, but he took a stab to the thigh.
Yeah, ouch. But yeah, interesting character. We got to talk about Estrid. But also they fall in with Arondir, who makes his entrance into this season in cool elvish fashion by rescuing the two of them from the Southlander ambush, or whoever it was. Where are they still working for Adar, or are they on their own, just forming bands, or what the deal was necessarily with these guys? We don't know necessarily.
Well,
But
the thing is, like in the previous episodes, we saw when Halbrand Sauron went before Adar and said, "Let my people go." His
right.
Moses.
Right.
Um, but these were people that Adar and the orcs had already enslaved and branded. But
Right.
if you let them go, it's not like the brand magically disappears.
Mm,
Now they've been kicked out of the orc camp,
right.
but it's not like they were given uh, provisions and somewhere to. Well, there wasn't a resettlement plan. It was right. We promised to let you go. You're now free. Go away.
Now
Where
what
did
they're homeless, they have no one providing for them, so they've turned to banditry or yeah. Yeah.
so I think it's calling them loyal to Adar
Right.
is uh, not actually what the show depicted,
Right.
which is it's a bit weird because we were shown that oh no, they're going to be let free. Okay, they are no longer loyal to Adar, but they had to swear. It was they were forced into that position. It's either swear loyalty or be executed.
Right.
Hmm. Oh well, I'm going to stick by my principles and just be executed. No, I'm going to swear loyalty, and then try and figure out a way to get away.
Yeah. I liked the introduction of Estrid as a character, and I like her thread in the sense that war is actually a situation that does create a lot of real trauma and homelessness. And the fact of the matter is, in most wars, a lot of people are just caught in the middle
Yeah.
and they're trying to survive. They've got one side over here threatening them, hey, you better cooperate with us or you're the enemy. And so they do. And then the other side is, hey, you cooperated with them. You're now the enemy. And they're just trying to survive. And I think Estrid's story captures that really well. So I actually liked the inclusion of her character. What did you think of her?
Well, and I think you hit on a really interesting point. A lot of fantasy, in particular epic fantasy, tends to valorize war.
Yeah.
And we use terms like, oh, the battle, as if that is somehow different from war, that war is dirty, war is destructive. We get that. So one of the ways that we get around it in a lot of epic fantasy, oh, he's a warrior and this was a battle and this was a great and glorious, the just war theory for a lot of things. And
Right.
this show seems to be aware of that sea change that happened in fantasy writing, to be more aware of war as devastating
Mm-hmm.
and the actual ramifications and repercussions of that,
Yeah.
and putting that in. And it's not, at no point are they going, oh yeah, the orcs are good. The orcs are not good, but it's being aware of different positions instead of
Yeah.
blindly, I am on this side and the other side is just all evil. But Tolkien presented the orcs as sentient and sapient.
Right.
They were at least semi-intelligent, because some of them are trilingual in the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. And they
They
have
are
babies. They have babies. We saw an orc baby and an orc mommy, which I actually liked in this episode. I think that was, I actually prefer that over what Peter Jackson did in the films, and with the the stirring the mud and having the orc guy come out of the mud and immediately be bloodthirsty and all that. So I don't know. What did you think of the orc baby?
well, for a start, Tolkien had a number of different conceptions of the orc. Like, we call it the
Right.
orc problem. Like, it was an issue for Tolkien. He never actually resolved it.
Correct.
He died before he could come to this is what the orcs are, because
Yeah.
if you make them completely and utterly evil and irredeemable, then they can't have a soul.
Right.
Then, oh well, what if they're just enslaved and Sauron has enslaved them and they have no free will? Well,
Mm.
then are they evil if they have no free will? They're not choosing to do it. Or, well, what if they're from corrupted elves? Well, if they're corrupted elves, they will still possess a soul. And then also, we had that sequence when Merry and Pippin get captured,
Right.
and we have the different dialects and languages that the orcs speak, and that it shows that they are intelligent and can reason and can argue, and they have different positions on things, which would imply that they are sentient and sapient.
Yeah.
In which case, but if they are corrupted elves, if that's where they originally started, then they are a biological species.
And they
If
have
they're a
babies.
biological species, then they have to procreate. If they have to procreate, then there are going to be baby orcs. And so it actually ties into what Christopher Tolkien selected as the sort of the definitive version of his father's ideas. He picked one and went, they were corrupted elves. Therefore, and this is the direct ramification of that they do have children, they do have procreation in this manner. And it doesn't make them, oh, they're not evil. They're still cruel, they're still mean, they're still
They're
nasty.
concerned for their offspring, right?
But, they care for their children. Why would they be cruel to their children? They're cruel to people they hit, not their own kids.
Right.
And giving that nuance to it fulfills part of what Tolkien was struggling with and trying to explore. And I think I actually liked seeing it on screen,
I do
because,
too.
like
Yeah.
you, when I watched Jackson's version, the only way I could reconcile what Saruman was doing was because Saruman was so heavily tied into the concept and theme of industrialization in Middle Earth that those weren't true orcs. This was Saruman's mechanized, industrialized, sort of magical recreation of orcs, which is why they were Uruk-hai. They were different. They
Right.
were not the same. And he had created a process. And I went, okay, that's how Jackson has envisaged it.
Right.
Fine. But let's face it, that's not how Tolkien described it.
Right.
That was, when people talk about, oh, it deviates from the lore, it's breaking canon. You're like, yeah, Jackson got there first.
Right. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not how orcs were created.
Right.
But there was a thematic sense to it.
Yeah.
Because that's what Saruman was doing. When we think of the scouring of the Shire, like bringing in the mechanization and all of this sort of stuff, you go, right, that fits with Saruman and the themes associated with him. With this, if we're going with the Tolkien's idea that these were corrupted elves, then they have to breed.
Right.
If they have to breed, then imagining that they have family units or something like that. You go, oh, well, that's not in the books, but they do have loyalties. And that's shown in The Lord of the Rings. So I thought this was actually quite an interesting interpretation of all of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I feel the same way. Another little thread that gets tied in here because of Arondir's entrance into the season is he and Theo have obviously some tension, and I think they made the best they could of a bad situation with the departure of the actor who played Bronwyn. That was never going to be an easy thing to deal with. They dealt with it about as smoothly as you could by simply having, and fortunately, in a way, she was wounded badly in the previous season, so they could say, "Oh, she died of her wound," and that does create some. I'm not entirely happy with where they go with Arondir and Theo, but I like that they've introduced some tension here, and there's a whole he's trying to be a father and you're not my father, and all of
You're
this.
not my real dad.
Yeah, yeah. What did you what's your take on the return of Theo and Arondir and all of this?
Well, obviously, like you pointed out, bad situation, an actor doesn't come back.
Right,
Well, what do we do with the character we had planned an arc for?
right,
And
right.
you have this little trapdoor where they can drop her character out and basically reintroduce it or introduce almost like Esther to fulfill kind of part of the role
Mm,
that Bronwyn would have filled. That all makes sense. It's making the best of the circumstances of what it actually means to make a TV show. Because I doubt anyone in the writers' room went, yeah, this is going to be great. We're going to have actors no longer come back, and this is perfect. It ties in perfectly to what we're doing.
right.
It's part of the practicalities of making a TV show. But with that, one of the things that I actually liked was when Arondir makes reference to the fact that orc arrows have this darkness to them, this evil to
Yeah, yeah.
human flesh doesn't deal with it as well.
Mm,
And we get a really nice shot of Arondir carrying all of the water buckets. It shows how much stronger the elves actually are compared to
right,
the humans. And
right.
that's something that we see in Tolkien's works, that elves are stronger and faster and more nimble and all these things because Tolkien loved the elves. They were his perfect creation,
Right.
whereas humans on Arda were more flawed, shall we say.
Yeah.
Because even when we think of Numenor, the reason the blood of Numenor was so strong was because it was intermingled with the blood of elves.
Mm.
They were in some way more than human. They weren't.
Certainly the royal line was, Elros, Elrond's brother, was the beginning of the royal Numenorian line. So, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And the thing with and this is part, I'm not overly enamored with Theo and Arondir's storylines. That
Okay. Yeah.
they
I'm
aren't
not either. I'm a
capturing
little
my.
annoyed, honestly. Yeah.
And the thing is, the actor playing Theo does a brilliant job showing the
Being salty.
stroppy teen.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
he's this sullen, "You're not my real dad. Oh, I'm so over this." He's doing that perfectly. I don't think we're meant to look at Theo and go, "Oh yeah, he's awesome." Like he's actually showing this. What I find interesting, I think there was some fan theory that he's going to become like the Witch King or something. I think he's far more likely to end up the king in Dunhar, the king of the dead, who betrays his oaths
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
to Isildur, and then ultimately their shades help Aragorn
There's a
as the.
line that Arondir drops about royalty to him, and that just kind of, did you notice that line? I can't remember exactly what he says, but something about royalty. So I think you might be onto something with that, but we'll see.
And that was something I thought from the beginning, that a lot of these Southlanders, these humans, part of that was going to tie into um
Uh-huh.
that settlement at
Yeah.
Dunhow, the
Right.
army of the dead. And the more I'm seeing of it, the more that is convincing me. Um,
Yeah.
Particularly because I think Arondir makes a point about making oaths and promises or something to him. I
Hmm.
can't remember the line. I wondered. I'll just have a quick scroll here for a second.
Okay, sure. While you do that, I will also mention it does not occur in this episode, but strong hints that we'll talk about it when we talk about episode 4. Theo's ultimate fate at the near the end of this episode is that he gets abducted by something very big, and it was going to have to be one of two things. It was going to be either a troll or an ent. If you're a fan of Middle Earth, you would have known that right away, I think. Yeah, so it we saw a troll earlier in the episode, meeting with Adar, because Adar is trying to, ally himself to the trolls, gets some more muscle into his cause. And the troll comes back with the messenger's head and says, "Yeah, okay, what do you want?" So we know, ooh, this is a scary troll. But yeah, the end interpretation gets a little bit of a boost even here because we see the petals
Yeah.
that Arondir keeps coming across, and I myself saw that and thought, oh, we're going to see some Ents. So
And also, if you're going to introduce trolls, the corrupted facsimile of what an ent is,
yeah,
then we also get the ents at the same time. So there's nice mirroring with it.
yeah, yeah,
Um, it's Arondir providing that sort of action sequence. Again, it's a bit of action on screen,
yeah,
his entrance, and then the difficulty of the relationship with Theo, and Theo sort of vacillating between obeying certain things and making promises and breaking promises. That's what leads me to believe that he is being set up for that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think you're onto it. Something that they're trying to do there. So, unless you found what you were looking for, we could move to how about if we go to Numenor and discuss what's happening there with Miriel, who's obviously facing some political upheaval, opposition, the machinations of our Pharazôn, or he's just Pharazôn at the moment, but he's about, does he change his name when he usurps power? I don't remember. But anyway, Pharazôn is doing his thing, getting his henchmen to manipulate, and also Elendil's daughter is unfortunately mixed in with this a attempt to Aarion, I think is her name, right?
Yeah.
With this usurping of Muriel's power because she's mad about what she thinks is her brother's death, that Muriel brought about Isildur's death as she sees it. So, and of course, we get the arrival another Middle Earth cameo, the Great Eagle, right? What did you think of all that? Did that moment work for you with Pharazôn's manipulations and then culminating in that arrival of the eagle for the coronation?
The whole coronation thing we can talk about in a minute, because
Okay.
I think that was actually a brilliant sequence.
That was a good scene, I thought. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things I find interesting is obviously Pharazôn is being depicted as a populist, as a demagogue, and
Right.
he is very cunning. Not necessarily a great leader. He is cunning and an opportunist,
Right.
and also incredibly arrogant. Yes, he is, you know, Muriel recognizes him as cousin, like he is part of the elite,
Yeah.
but he wanders into the king's bedchamber while Muriel is there going through her father's effect, as if he owns the place. Like
Right.
that's supreme arrogance.
Right.
We can see the power of a populist. In the previous season, there was this whole thing, oh, one elf has arrived. I can use this to serve. Oh, the elves are going to come back and they're going to steal our jobs. And it was
Right.
like, oh, but it's just one elf. How can you go? Because you don't wait until the whole thing has happened to stir up a crowd to give you power. You warn them or you make it into a big deal, even when it isn't, because that gives you more power. He's a
Right.
demagogue. he is using this. Why does he wear all of the guild badges? He clearly hasn't earned them. He didn't go through apprenticeships for all of these guilds. He is set up as he is the titular head of all of these guilds, therefore he can wear all the badges, claiming other people's skill. Everything is an outward projection of power for him. And he is clearly an opportunist. And the power that he then wields, you can see he's trying to find what the people may believe and what they're whispering about in order to turn it to his advantage.
Yeah.
Because when we have that meeting where Arian is sitting with them all, they're sitting in a place in town where they are not expected to be. They are not sitting where they usually are. Why would these rich and powerful people be sitting in a dingy bar in the middle of the old town? Well, it's because they're conspirators. They don't want to be overheard. They don't want people to see them together. They want to go somewhere where they're not going to be recognized.
Right.
And that's because they are plotting and scheming.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciated some of the things they did. The Aarian character, her anger over her brother's death, which, by the way, I forgot to mention too, when we were talking about Isildur earlier, something that I actually kind of liked that they did with his character was that moment when he's talking to Estrid about his mother and how she died actually saving him when he had done something foolish, swimming out further than he should have. And that being, it's a sort of a tie-in to the Isildur we all know, the one who ultimately takes the ring and thinks, I can save the world. I can be they kind of give that motivation to him through that story of his mother. I thought that was good. I actually thought that was good storytelling when they gave him that backstory. What did you think of that?
And again, I think this ties very heavily into one of the big themes that is being explored here, which is, do the ends justify the means?
Right.
Are we being driven because we can see this great goal? What sacrifices or what compromises are we going to make?
Right.
And there's also, is our judgment compromised? Because we see with Arian that she blames Muriel for Isildur's apparent death.
Right.
So she's denying the agency of her own brother to make a choice for himself, as if Muriel ordered him to do it. She didn't. She asked for volunteers.
He actually wanted to go. Yeah.
Isildur wanted to go. But in our grief, we obviously, one of the stages of grief, anger, it is easier to blame someone than to admit that the person we have lost may have been responsible for what happened, that they may have part of it. It is so difficult for us to admit that because we miss them so much. We love them so much. It is easier to blame an external source and to put all of that pain and suffering on them.
Yeah.
And we have that very neatly contrasted with when Muriel is confronted by the grieving widow.
Slapped on the face. Yeah.
And instead of reacting in anger, reacts with empathy, with compassion.
Yeah.
And shows love, what is going to heal the people, make the people better. Whereas what we see with Pharazôn is tapping into that anger to become more divisive, to use it for his own personal gain.
Yep.
And I thought that was a very neat way to illustrate the two different approaches to leadership, where Muriel is thinking of her people and healing her people and wanting what's best for her people. There is danger coming in the future that she is aware of, and she's trying to get everyone together to protect them. Whereas Pharazôn is, no, I'm going to use this to get my own power.
Yeah.
And so we see that the use of anger, at no point do I think Pharazôn actually believes he's right.
No.
I don't think any of it is based in an ideological position where he thinks this is what is best for Numenor.
He's a con man after power. That's what he is. Yeah.
I think he's thinking this is what's best for Pharazôn.
Right.
And an interesting thing that tied into that was when he was talking about when his own father died and this this goblet that was half full of wine. And he goes, oh, my father hated whiskey, so I drank it. And it's a very ambiguous statement because we can look at it as he was trying to honor his father, Or we can look at it as, yeah, this is mine now and I'm going to have it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's so ambiguous, and it's up to the viewer to interpret the meaning behind that statement. But to go back to, well, do we want to just focus on Muriel
Yeah,
and
let's finish up with Muriel and the arrival of the eagle and the whole scene, which I thought was one of the better scenes in these two episodes. But yeah,
one of the things I liked about this, Farazan very clearly states in the private meeting with Muriel that it would be exceptionally rare for an eagle to show up. But if an eagle did show up,
right.
that would be such a wonderful, positive omen about your rule. And it would be like the eagle shows up. What's Farazan do? He claims it.
He appropriates the eagle, the arrival of the eagle, as a symbol.
He used something that clearly everyone knew was an eagle arriving for Muriel's coronation to show that it was sanctified and blessed, and this is a positive omen. That Muriel should be queen.
Right.
That is what is being signaled here. But Farazan sees a moment to usurp that, to twist it to his own ends.
Exactly.
And he draws a sword. Farazan, the well-renowned warrior, is wearing a sword. You go, this is all about outward projection. None of this.
He's got the prop. He's got the prop, and he's gonna, whip it out. Yeah.
And that's exactly what I was saying about all of the guild badges. This is all projection about who he is, this image of who he is, when none of it is true. It is all scheming. It is all showmanship.
Right.
And he usurps it. He is an opportunist. And that moment where we had, why does everyone keep dropping Palantirs? Out of interest. Like this.
It's fun to drop them and see how they roll, I guess. But it's taken as a symbol of elves, obviously, with all the anti-elf prejudice. And Muriel says, in her honesty, oh yeah, that's mine. In there, oh, the elf stone, she's horrible, blah blah blah. So,
but it's the indestructible elf stone. Let's destroy it.
Yeah, that was funny. I thought, okay, good luck with that, buddy. Yeah.
But throughout in the Lord of the Rings, it's like, oh look, it's a Palantir, let's drop it. Yeah, it seems to happen quite a lot. But what I find interesting is Muriel is obviously blind, and yet she is the one who is seeing the potential future so clearly.
Yeah.
Farazan, who is sighted, is blind to what is going because he refuses to engage with the things that will give him sight. And yet with it, we know that the Palantir are very, very dangerous.
Yes, indeed.
Repeatedly throughout the Lord of the Rings, they are used to deceive and mislead.
Although at this point, and it's true even in the Silmarillion that the Palantir there does play a role, but at this point in Rings of Power, at least, Sauron does not have his hands on a Palantir, does he?
No, but again, it's one of the things we know of, and this is the awkward thing about one of the awkward things about Rings of Power. It is both sort of trying to do this prequel, but tie it into aspects of the Lord of the Rings, which is the much more well-known and better work.
Right.
And in doing that, then I think they are trying to show us stuff that people will know from the Lord of the Rings and are then tweaking what they are showing to fit with that. And I think that's where some of the choices that they have made, that's where I'm feeling uncomfortable with.
I feel that they tried to do too much, honestly, of that. But we do have one more thread, which is
before we talk about that, it was again about Farazan, because one of the things that I really liked about the depiction of him is how all of the other people, they keep looking to Farazan for cues, and of course he doesn't say anything. It's the little look. So his hands are clean. He has it. Oh, I was just responding to what the people wanted.
Right.
Again, that highly manipulative behavior of having that plausible deniability.
Yeah.
It is, and it was so well done in this. And I greatly enjoyed that aspect of it. I think some of the writing, some of the direction, and what they have done with those things, because it's, again, Farazan isn't going to the other lords, they are going to him, which Muriel asks Elendil about it. It's like, who is speaking to whom? And he's like, oh, they approached Pharazôn. So she knows Pharazôn is at the top and everyone else is going to him. Like, she recognizes this, whereas other people are not as savvy. So while the Numenoran political storyline is not necessarily my favorite,
Mm-hmm.
I actually think it's being very well done.
Yeah, I would say the way I would put it is this thread was the one that worked the best for me in this episode. That's how I would put it. But then we do have one other thread with Durin, and he is invited to visit Celebrimbor and Anatar, and Disa.
Natar.
Yep, and Disa comes along too, of course, showing her usual good sense, and so that is a part of this that is obviously going to be very important with the creation of the 7 rings for the dwarf leaders, and the spreading of this cancer that is Sauron's plot in order to control, and he's doing it through and in many cases the desperation and the goodwill of the people that he's manipulating. So, but Durin is very suspicious. He's very hard, stubborn fellow who more than anyone else, actually, Durin sees through this shady character, this Anatar, this pretty boy, right? I mean, he's he's immediately suspicious. Like, he doesn't know Elrond, because Elrond never would have said anything nice about me like that, right? I like that. I like Durin's roughness in contrast to the smooth, Anatar there. So what do you think of this thread? Any thoughts on the Durin Disa
There,
narrative? And poor
there
Celebrimbor just getting himself so manipulated. Like, could you trip and fall into the trap any worse than you do? It's like he thinks it's his own idea, even like, oh, I'm gonna write this letter right now, and of course Sauron is right there. That was easy.
well, one of the interesting things about this is in everything that Sauron says, there's always a grain of truth to it.
Yeah,
It's this grain of truth that embeds in the lies and makes the lies more believable.
right.
And people always say, "Oh, well, he got him to do this." It's Sauron as master manipulator, as this liar, this deceiver. It's making people do the things that he wants without them realizing that he wants them to do them.
Yeah,
I thought they've actually depicted a lot of that very, very well, because quite often we have a very simplistic notion about, oh, he deceived them and got them to do these things. Now we're seeing it in action and how these people are being manipulated through their own good intentions. Celebrimbor, yes, prideful, wanting to be better than Fëanor,
there's that
wanting to
theme
be
again. Yeah,
his
yeah,
pride, his ambition, and that is being manipulated and twisted by Sauron. But he's not an evil person.
all right.
Oh, we can help heal the dwarven lands.
Yeah,
Again, the ends justifying the means. What compromises are we going to make in order to fulfill the greater good? Well, I'll lie to the High King. And I know I shouldn't lie to the High King, but it's worth it in order to do this great thing. Again,
right.
looking at that as something that's being explored.
Yep.
Um,
Also for him though, in that moment, it's, oh, I'm gonna help the world, I'm gonna do a good thing, but this is my purpose, this is my moment, me, right? And that's where Celebrimbor's pride comes in too.
and we can compare that to Isildur. Isildur is looking for that moment as well.
Yeah,
Where how can I do this? How can I rise to that moment
right,
that shows that I am worthy of the sacrifice that my mother made?
right.
And again, as Estrid points out, you can't. You can't earn it. That was a gift. That was someone who loved you, sacrificed themselves for you. You cannot earn that.
Mm,
But again, it's part of our own guilt about things that someone made this sacrifice. I need to be worthy of that, which
yeah,
puts pressure on ourselves to how can I somehow fulfill this? And for Celebrimbor, looking at what Fëanor accomplished and going, I want to be that. I want to be better than that because,
mm,
you know, everything I do is always going to be compared. And yet he is making the same mistakes as Fëanor.
Well,
His
I was going to say it's ironic because look at the aftermath. Look at the destruction caused by Feanor's brilliance and the destruction caused by Celebrimbor's brilliance. And yeah, great parallel. Good job, buddy. You know.
and but again, and it's tied into the arrogance, it's tied into the pride, it's
Yeah.
tied into I created this thing and it is mine and I get to decide what to do with it. And
Right.
we contrast that so much with Durin, with Deeza's help. It must be stressed. Durin swallowing his own pride.
Yeah.
Durin backing down from his own arrogance and pride and stubbornness. Because Deeza reminds him, okay, sure, fine. But what about our children? What about our family? What about our friends? What about our people? What about your responsibility to everyone else?
Right. And I would suggest that it's Durin's, with Disa's help, his ability to humble himself that will make the difference between him and his father. Because his father's going to fall completely for this whole ring thing. He is going to be completely taken in. He's going to wear one of these rings. He's going to be a total dupe when it comes to Sauron's manipulations. Whereas Durin, because of that humility, is going to be able to resist that. I think that that's the major difference between the two of them, and it is important to stress that's with a lot of pushing from Disa. Yeah.
And I think one of the really nice parallels and contrasts here we have is the arrogance of Sauron. We have summoned you here to help you.
Uh-huh.
No,
Yeah.
you don't summon an equal.
Right.
You invite. And yet it is clear from Sauron's perspective that they are beneath him.
Right.
Which, you know, like he's a basically an angelic being. Like, okay, fair enough. This is immortal. But he clearly doesn't understand dwarves.
Right.
He understands elves. Elves are full of pride. They have arrogance. They, you know, as much as Tolkien loved elves, you know, some of them were a little bit arrogant, a little bit
Oh, they
prideful.
did get themselves into some pretty bad situations through that arrogance. Yes. Yeah.
And of all of the races, the men are shown to be quite weak and again susceptible to these things. Dwarves, on the other hand, are a very different thing. You know, from the stone, they were not born or created the same way. That they are actually quite different. I don't think Sauron understands that. And when we think about what happens with the rings, the men succumb to the rings and become the wraiths, but the dwarves never do. And it's there must be some. Yes,
They're tougher.
very
Yeah.
there are very negative side effects of the dwarves getting the ring, but they're not the same. Sauron doesn't dominate them in the same way that he does the men. And I think part of that is Sauron just doesn't understand the dwarves. They are
Yeah.
too different. And I think that was actually a very nice note
Mm.
for the show to be dropping in here, where Sauron falls back on the flattery. Oh, Elrond said you were the wisest. You know,
Yeah.
the simple flattery that would work with a lot of the elves does not work with the dwarves because that's not who they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Durin's.
thought a lot of that was actually incredibly well done,
Mhm.
and um, seeing seeing the back and forth between Disa and Durin, and even the moment where Celebrimbor overrules Sauron.
Uh-huh.
We need some time. We need a wee moment to think about this. And Sauron's like, oh, absolutely. And Celebrimbor goes, no, give them time. Because Celebrimbor knows the dwarves better
Yep.
than Sauron does. Sauron doesn't want to know about them. He doesn't want to learn. He wants to dominate.
Right. Right.
So I thought that again was very, very interesting. And it shows, like at heart, again, Celebrimbor is not evil, but
Right.
he is being misled. And
And he has a flaw, like all elves and people, which is how Sauron takes advantage of him. Because, as you said, he understands elves and elvish pride very well, and
one of the things I liked about the very last scene, we with the making of the rings
Mhm.
was Durin, King Durin, holding the box open with the mithril in it
Yeah.
and inviting Celebrimbor to pick it up. Celebrimbor picks it up. They nod, there is respect. As he walks over, Sauron holds out his hand.
Gimme, gimme.
No,
Yeah.
but holds out his hand and goes, give it to me, stops him.
Right.
That power dynamic, again, very subtly done.
Mm.
And then as he takes it, the clasping of it, which is clearly, showing the audience him manipulating, imbuing it with his power,
Yeah. Yeah.
his spirit, and then dropping it in. But you see that lack of respect. We saw the respect that Celebrimbor had for Durin. We saw
Yeah.
that exchange. And again, the difference just with that, it wasn't a huge moment. It wasn't, oh, look at all of this. It just was nicely done and shown to us rather than being told to us.
Yeah.
So I like that. But we can go back to Durin meeting Durin, the
Yes.
throne room scene.
Yeah. His apology moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a good scene, I thought. And again, I think that really stressed the difference between the two, because it wasn't a mutual thing, although I feel that they were mutually to blame for the rift, but Durin Senior still has that very stiff pride. And you could see as a father, he wants to be reconciled with his son, but he wants his son to do all the reconciling. He doesn't want to move. He's like, you come to me. Come on, boy, come to me. And so he's like, anything else? And you can see the little eyebrow movement. I thought the whole scene was well acted. And Durin swallows his pride. And again, I feel very strongly that ability to humble himself is the key to the difference between the two of them. And I don't see the father in that scene really meeting him halfway. I see him saying, you come all the way to me,
Yeah. And the perfect example of that is after Durin Jr. has made the apology and he's like, you look terrible, which is this kind of, and he's, oh, miners' fists are hard. And King Durin is, oh, wait until your children grow up, and walks off. You go, that would have been the perfect moment for you to humble yourself even a tiny bit.
Yeah.
Acknowledge your son a tiny bit. But he won't even do that.
No.
That pride, that arrogance, that stubbornness, that Durin, the other Durin, admits and says, I am like you. We both have this.
Right.
But this is more important than our feud, than our grudge.
Yep.
Our people. The fact that they're going to open up the grain stores that might last 3 months. I loved actually that when they get to Eregion, it's like, oh yeah, we're here for aid. What are you going to give us? Rings. And it's like, we need food. What do you do? Rings?
Yeah.
What? I love that sort of incredulity that Durin had when the offer is made, because, oh yeah, you're going to make us awesome. Everyone's starving. What are they going to eat? Rings?
Right. Right.
That attitude. But with Durin having that moment, like even when he walked into the throne room and his head lowered, his eyes on the floor, then looking up, and we had that, he was doing a very difficult thing for him, because what was important was not his own pride, it was his people.
Yeah.
And I think Durin Senior just still can't see that.
I agree.
And is
that's going to
incapable.
lead to his downfall. Yeah.
Were there, I'm sure we've missed something.
I think we've been pretty thorough. Of course, we didn't get everything. I think the stranger and halfling storyline doesn't pick up until episode 4. So we'll talk about that over at your channel.
There is one thing I wanted to mention.
Sure.
Something that came out in this episode. Estrid, Isildur, Theo, and Arondir all have survivor's guilt. All of them.
Yes. Yeah.
And they're all dealing with it in different ways.
Yeah.
And this is something that I love seeing explored in fiction. It's not, here is this thing and this is how it's explored. It's like, here is this thing. Here are multiple ways it's explored to show you the strengths and weaknesses of all of the different things, but it is a commonality across a lot of different people.
Yep.
And I thought that the survivor's guilt aspect and how our past, what has happened in the past, and what we think about the past can affect our judgment about what we do now, which
Yep.
ties into Celebrimbor, ties into Galadriel, ties into.
Galadriel, which will be next episode as well
Yeah.
in a big way. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think there's not a lot more that I would say. I'm sure someone will go, oh, but what about that episode? Oh, yeah, that was a fun thing. And there's lots
Yeah.
of stuff we could talk about. But
Well,
thank you.
I'm glad we did find some positives to this episode. I think that there were some things that were done well in what felt a little bit of a wobbly episode. I will struggle to say more positive things about episode 4, to be honest with you. So
Yeah.
that'll be an interesting conversation.
Well, no, and episode 4, I think, showcases my issues with a lot of the decisions that they have made that I had in season 1. And we'll talk more about it then, because I think it's more appropriate then, because it actually, there are a lot of illustrations of the things that I personally have issues with.
Okay, yeah. Well, everyone will be there. There we go. That's a little teaser for our discussion of episode 4, where we're not going to rant. That's not what we do. But we're going to point out a few things. So thank you everybody for watching, and until next time.